So imagine you just stepped off a plane. You get that humid, salt-tinged breeze right off the Indian Ocean.
Mm.
You are looking at Mauritius.
Oh, yeah. It is the absolute definition of a tropical haven.
Right. I mean, from a distance, it's just these sprawling, pristine white sand beaches, vibrant coral reefs, teeming with marine life.
Lush, jagged mountain peaks dominating the skyline.
Exactly. It's the kind of environment that just feels completely disconnected from the industrial grind of the modern world.
It really does.
But beneath that postcard perfect surface, there is this invisible, highly carbon-intensive engine, keeping the entire illusion running.
Yeah, the dirty secret of the island.
Yes, because right now, a staggering 82% of Mauritius's electricity and over 90% of its primary energy overall comes from imported fossil fuels.
It's wild when you think about it.
It is. You've got these heavy cargo ships constantly docking in Port Louis, just offloading massive quantities of coal and heavy fuel oil just to keep the resorts illuminated and the local economy functioning.
And the contrast is jarring when you look at the raw data, right? You have a geography that is naturally rich in solar and ocean resources, yet its energy reality is entirely tethered to distant extraction economies.
And highly volatile global supply chains.
Exactly. It's just a really precarious way to operate a country.
Which is exactly why the mission of our deep dive today is so critical. We are looking at how isolated, land-scarce islands can fundamentally sever that tether to fossil fuels.
And actually engineer a resilient 100% renewable energy grid by the year 2050.
Right. And to map out this transition, we are diving into a really comprehensive piece of research titled, and bear with me, it's a long one, Electricity Balancing for Resilient 100% Renewable Energy Systems on Islands, Imported E-Fuels versus Domestic E-Hydrogen on the case of Mauritius.
It is a mouthful, but the findings are incredible.
You really are. And, we often treat islands as mere vacation destinations, right?
Yeah, but climatologically and economically, they are the absolute front lines.
Totally. They're facing rising sea levels, eroding coastlines.
Increasingly violent tropical cyclones, all of it.
Right. But because their energy grids are geographically isolated, they can't just pull power from a neighboring country when their own generation dips.
They're on their own, which means they are forced to innovate faster.
Yeah, the extreme constraints of an island grid make it the perfect incubator.
Exactly. If you can solve the physics and economics of a 100% renewable baseload in Mauritius, you are essentially beta testing the energy architecture that major continental cities will eventually need.
That isolation forces a kind of ruthless efficiency. But when you start talking about replacing a constant stream of coal with renewables, you hit a physical wall almost immediately.
A very literal physical wall.
Yes. We're talking about land scarcity. The study we're looking at draws a very hard line here.
It has to, honestly.
Right. It models utility-scale, ground-mounted solar photovoltaics, but it caps the allowable land usage at just 1.45% of the island's total surface area.
Which sounds tiny, but 1.45% makes total sense when you actually look at their economy.
Oh, absolutely. Mauritius has this massive agricultural sector historically built around sugarcane, right?
Right, and a massive luxury ecotourism industry.
Yeah, so you can't simply bulldoze natural reserve or prime farmland to build massive solar arrays.
No, because you'd be destroying the very economy you are trying to power. You would literally be cannibalizing the island's GDP just to keep the lights on.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Trying to power an entire modern economy using only the space of like a few golf courses.
Yeah.
It's like trying to fit a week's worth of groceries into a mini fridge.
That is exactly what it's like. You have to get incredibly creative with the space you have.
So how did the researchers even begin to calculate that?
Well, because the spatial tolerance is so tight, they utilized a highly sophisticated modeling tool called the EP-Allison-Luty framework.
Yeah, I saw that acronym in the methodology. On paper, it sounds incredibly dense.
It is a bit dense, yeah.
But functionally, it's just running a massive optimization algorithm, right?
Basically, yes. It's essentially a deterministic modeling environment that calculates the levelized cost of energy across thousands of interconnected variables.
Oh, wow. So it's not just looking at basic yearly averages.
Not at all. It simulates the grid hour by hour for an entire year. It takes historical weather data, solar irradiance dips during the rainy season, wind speeds.
It fences them against hourly energy demand profiles.
Exactly. It calculates the potential for rooftop solar on existing structures, incorporates onshore wind, and even models biomass from agricultural waste.
So it's leaving no stone unturned.
Right. The goal of the framework is to find the absolute least cost pathway to ensure the grid doesn't fail for even a single hour.
But when you run an entire year of weather and economic data through a simulation that's constrained by that 1.45% land limit, the math highlights a really glaring mismatch, doesn't it?
Oh, massive mismatch.
Because the times of the year when the island has the highest energy demand, which is driven by these massive influxes of tourists, they don't perfectly align with the periods of maximum renewable generation.
Right. Onshore renewables hit a hard ceiling.
You can't just overbuild solar farms to power through the winter because you physically do not have the acreage.
And that seasonal mismatch is the crux of the whole engineering problem.
So what's the workaround?
Well, if you cannot overgenerate on demand, your only option is to capture and store every single megawatt you produce during your peak generation windows.
Which brings us face to face with the storage bottleneck.
Exactly. Now, the default assumption for most people when they hear renewable storage is, lithium-ion batteries.
Sure.
And for daily arbitrage, like storing noon sunlight to power the evening peak batteries, are exceptional. This study notes that battery storage provides a massive 96.4% round-trip efficiency.
I mean, that number is fantastic. You're losing less than 4% of your generated power.
It's incredibly efficient.
And here's where I want to push back a little. If the efficiency is that high, the limitation has to be chemical degradation and spatial density.
It hit the nail on the head.
Because if I need to capture a massive surplus of solar energy in November and hold on to it until a cloudy week in March, batteries are essentially useless.
Completely useless for that time frame.
Right. The self-discharge rate over 4 months would be significant. And just the sheer volume of batteries required to hold a month's worth of baseload power for an entire nation.
It would likely bankrupt the economy?
And take up half the island.
Yeah, the capital expenditure would just be astronomical. So for seasonal storage, the metric of success shifts entirely away from round-trip efficiency, and it moves toward energy density and duration.
Meaning you need a medium that can hold massive amounts of energy indefinitely without leaking or degrading.
Precisely. And in a 100% renewable system, the primary candidate for that is hydrogen.
Okay, so you use your excess summer solar power to run electrolyzers, splitting water to create green hydrogen gas.
Right, which you then compress and store until the rainy season.
Okay, I understand the duration argument, but the physics of that conversion are brutal.
They are.
Like, I'm looking at the data, and the round-trip efficiency of turning electricity into hydrogen, compressing it, storing it, and then running it back through a generator, it's a measly 30.1%.
Yeah, it's a steep drop-off.
I mean, we are throwing away nearly 70% of our hard-earned energy. For an island that is already starving for space to generate that power, burning off 70% of it in conversion losses just seems counterintuitive. Why would we ever choose hydrogen?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it's a bitter pill to swallow, but you accept that 70% loss because the alternative is a total grid collapse during a multi-day storm.
Oh, okay, that puts it in perspective.
Right. And to manage the land constraint while utilizing hydrogen, the study models the deployment of vertical compressed hydrogen pipes.
Wait, vertical pipes, not those massive round tanks you usually see.
Exactly. Instead of sprawling horizontal tank farms, you engineer high-pressure vertical storage. It drastically reduces the required surface area.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So the energy density of compressed hydrogen allows you to pack all that seasonal insurance into a really small footprint.
Exactly. You go up instead of out.
But, since we are looking for spatial efficiency and proven tech, I kept wondering while reading this, why didn't this study just lean into pumped hydro energy storage?
Ah, PHES.
Yeah, pumped hydro. I mean, it's the oldest, most reliable grid-scale storage on the planet. You just pump water up a mountain when power is cheap, and you let it spin a turbine on the way down when you need it.
True.
And Mauritius is a volcanic island. It has the elevation. Why rely on highly inefficient hydrogen conversion when gravity and water do the trick?
That is a great question. And the framework actually tested that exact hypothesis.
Yeah.
It hit a hard geological barrier.
Really?
Yeah. Pumping millions of gallons of water requires constructing massive upper reservoirs, right? And boring large-scale penstocks through the mountainside.
Sure, that's heavy engineering.
Well, the topographical analysis of Mauritius reveals that 29% of its landmass is classified as a high erosion area.
Ah, so you're dealing with unstable basalt and volcanic soil.
Exactly. The districts with the necessary elevation gradients are at severe risk for rockfalls, landslides, and rapid earth flows.
Oh, wow. So it's a safety issue.
A massive one. If you attempt the heavy civil engineering required for pumped hydro in those zones, you risk catastrophic environmental failures. The geology physically rejects the infrastructure.
That is wild. Okay, so that leaves compressed hydrogen as the only viable seasonal safety net to keep those multi-fuel internal combustion generators running when onshore renewables fall short.
Right, the MICGs, those are critical here.
Yeah, these are internal combustion engines that are basically retrofitted to run on whatever fuel is available to the grid operators, right?
Exactly. Whether that's synthetic diesel or pure hydrogen gas.
And this creates a massive strategic fork in the road for the island's policymakers.
Mm.
We know we need a combustible fuel to get through the winter. The question is, do we synthesize it locally or do we buy it on the open market?
And the study meticulously models both of those pathways.
Let's get into that.
So option A is importing what the industry calls e-fuels from the global market.
Right, these are synthetic hydrocarbons like e-diesel or e-methanol.
Exactly. They are manufactured in places with massive, cheap renewable resources, like Chile or Australia, by combining green hydrogen with captured CO2.
And because they're liquid, they can just be shipped globally using existing fossil fuel tanker infrastructure.
Right. Then you have option B, which is producing e-hydrogen domestically, entirely within the borders of Mauritius.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because option A is essentially the food delivery app model of energy grid management.
I like that.
I mean, it's incredibly convenient. You don't have to build the electrolyzers or secure the land for massive chemical plants. You just pay the premium and wait for the tanker to arrive.
But you are completely at the mercy of the platform.
Exactly. If there is geopolitical crisis, a global pandemic, a supply chain breakdown, or massive surge pricing, your grid goes dark.
Right.
Whereas option B, the domestic hydrogen, is like building a greenhouse and canning your own food for the winter.
Yeah, it requires a staggering amount of upfront capital and heavy infrastructure, but you achieve absolute sovereignty over your supply.
And that analogy cuts right to the economic and political reality of the situation, doesn't it?
It really does, because choosing option A means Mauritius simply trades its current vulnerability to global fossil fuel markets for a new vulnerability to global synthetic fuel markets.
Which doesn't really solve the core problem of dependence.
Not at all. And the financial modeling inside the EP Allison-Lutt framework drops a massive financial hammer on the imported e-fuel strategy.
Okay, let's get into the actual numbers on that. From what I read, the current fossil fuel heavy system costs the island roughly 89.6 euros per megawatt hour, correct?
Yes, that is the baseline cost of their dirty grid today.
Right.
If they transition to a 100% renewable system, but rely on those imported e-fuels to balance the grid during seasonal lulls, the system cost actually increases.
Wait, it goes up?
It does. It jumps to a minimum of 99.4 euros per megawatt hour.
Wow. So they would spend billions of dollars to transition their grid, only to end up paying more per megawatt hour while remaining completely exposed to global shipping logistics.
Exactly. And no government is going to willingly sign up for a more expensive, equally vulnerable system just for the sake of decarbonization.
Obviously not. The economics simply do not support it.
The study makes it mathematically undeniable to actually achieve resilience and to lower costs below the current fossil fuel baseline, the island must produce its own domestic hydrogen.
But hold on, this circles us right back to the central paradox of the whole deep dive. We established like 10 minutes ago that they are strictly capped at 1.45% of their land mass for utility solar.
Right, the hard land limit.
If you are going to manufacture enough domestic hydrogen to power an entire nation through the rainy season, you need a massive amount of excess electricity to run those electrolyzers.
Huge amount, yes.
So if the land is maxed out, where is the generation coming from?
Well, you have to look past the beaches. If the terrestrial environment is saturated, the only remaining frontier is the exclusive economic zone surrounding the island. You have to move the energy production offshore.
Okay, the ocean phase of this study is where the engineering gets incredibly ambitious.
It really does.
Because they model the integration of wave energy converters, or WECs, and floating offshore solar photovoltaics, or OFPV.
Right.
And look, the floating solar makes sense in theory. You mount PV panels on high-density polyethylene pontoons anchored to the seabed.
Yeah.
But putting fragile electrical equipment in a saltwater environment prone to violent tropical cyclones?
It sounds like a maintenance nightmare, right?
Total nightmare. The marine environment is famously hostile to infrastructure. You've got salt corrosion, biofouling, and just the extreme kinetic forces from wave swells. Usually that makes offshore solar prohibitively expensive because of all the structural reinforcements you need.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the researchers actually identify a brilliant mechanical synergy here.
By co-locating them, right?
Exactly. By co-locating the wave energy converters and the floating solar arrays in the exact same offshore lease area.
Okay, but how do those two specific technologies interact? Because wave converters are usually these massive point absorber buoys or long articulating tubes that physically extract kinetic energy from the ocean's swell. How does that help a solar panel?
Well, by extracting that kinetic energy, the wave converters fundamentally alter the hydrodynamics of the water behind them.
Oh, see.
Yeah, you position the WECs on the outer perimeter of your offshore site facing the incoming swells.
So they take the hit first.
Exactly. As they absorb the incoming wave energy to generate electricity, they actively act as a buffer. They act as active breakwaters.
Yeah.
They essentially strip the violence out of the water, creating an artificially calmed lagoon or a shadow zone in their wake, and then you deploy your fragile floating solar panels inside that protected zone.
Oh, that is brilliant. It's like planting a row of deeply rooted oak trees to act as a windbreak so you can safely grow a delicate crop of tomatoes behind them.
That is a perfect analogy. The wave converters take the physical beating from the extreme storms and cyclones, they harvest the power from that beating, and they simultaneously engineer a safe operating environment for the solar arrays.
The co-location strategy is just a masterclass in spatial efficiency. And furthermore, because they are sitting in the exact same marine footprint, they can share the expensive underwater transmission cables that carry the power back to the onshore grid, right?
Exactly. The infrastructure costs are shared across two totally different generation technologies.
So when this study runs the final simulation, combining the 1.45% onshore solar, the vertical hydrogen storage, and this offshore wave solar synergy, what does it actually do to the price of power?
Okay, the final optimization numbers are the definitive payoff of this research. So we'll call the baseline. The dirty imported fossil fuel system currently costs 89.6 euros per megawatt hour.
Right. That is the number to beat.
If Mauritius builds an offshore system utilizing only dedicated wave power to generate their domestic hydrogen, the overall system cost drops to 83.3 euros per megawatt hour.
Wait, really? So wave energy alone officially undercuts coal and oil?
It does. It brings it down to 83.3. But the absolute optimized scenario, the real golden ticket, is the hybrid system.
Co-location.
Yes. When they combine the wave power breakwaters with the floating offshore solar PV, generating massive amounts of cheap power to produce domestic seasonal hydrogen, the levelized cost plummets to 59.8 euros per megawatt hour.
59.8 euros.
Yeah.
That is a drastic reduction. That's what, like a 33% reduction in the cost of energy?
Exactly. It is not just environmentally cleaner, it is drastically cheaper than their current fossil fuel setup. It completely disrupts the economic argument for fossil fuels.
I mean, it provides absolute energy sovereignty, total price stability, completely decoupled from global markets.
And it accomplishes all of this while maintaining the strict land conservation limits necessary for the island's tourism and agriculture.
The technical elegance of that solution is phenomenal, which really brings us to the broader implications of this research.
Right, because it's not just about Mauritius.
No. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Even if you don't live on a tropical island in the Indian Ocean, the constraints that define Mauritius, a hard physical boundary on usable space, the absolute necessity for dense, seasonal energy storage that doesn't rely on chemical batteries, and the desire to break free from volatile global supply chains, these are the exact same thermodynamic and spatial problems facing major global cities.
Completely. Think of places like Tokyo, Singapore, or New York.
Exactly. You cannot pave Manhattan with solar panels, and you definitely cannot fit enough lithium-ion batteries in a skyscraper to power it through a dark, freezing winter.
The physics of a constrained grid are universal. The hybrid offshore generation and domestic hydrogen storage models engineered for Mauritius, those are the blueprints that densely populated coastal urban centers are going to have to adopt as they push toward their own 100% renewable targets.
It's just incredible. We have spent this entire deep dive unpacking electricity balancing for resilient 100% renewable energy systems on islands, imported e-fuels versus domestic e-hydrogen on the case of Mauritius. And it leaves us with this really fascinating geopolitical shift to consider.
Oh, absolutely.
Historically, global power dynamics have been dictated by massive continental nations that just happen to sit on top of vast reserves of fossil fuels under the ground.
Right.
But if this offshore hydrogen-producing technology scales the way this modeling suggests, the future of energy production isn't under the ground, it's out in the ocean.
Right. What happens to the global economy when tiny, isolated archipelago nations suddenly have the technological capacity to harvest the kinetic energy of the sea, package it into green hydrogen, and become the new net exporters of energy to the rest of the world?
It completely flips the script on energy dependency.
It really does. We usually think of small, remote islands as being behind the technological curve, completely reliant on the mainland.
Yeah.
But as the world scrambles to figure out how to transition to 100% renewable energy in densely packed environments,
Yeah.
what if the most isolated places on Earth end up becoming the ultimate survival blueprints for the rest of humanity?
Wow. It transforms the pristine island from a fragile postcard into the absolute powerhouse of the 21st century. So the next time you look at a photo of a tropical horizon, just imagine the invisible architecture. Just off the coast, the wave attenuators and floating solar arrays silently turning the ocean's motion into the fuel of the future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.